we yesterday in our fourth class on history of Jewish law, we spoke about the Midrash Halacha, and said we're going to continue to Mishnah. But before that, I just want to give an example, a sample of how the Midrash Halacha works. How do you look at the text? How much could you write on the text and try to expand on it? So here's a famous verse in Parashat Mishpatim that deals with damages, physical damages, financial damages. And the text of the Torah says this: Ayn tahat ayn, shen tahat shen, yad tahat yad, regel tahat ragel. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a leg for a leg. So you look at the text, literally what it means is if someone poked someone's eye, he comes to court, the court will poke his eye. If you broke his leg, they will break his leg, etc. Now, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to us today, and it didn't make sense to the rabbis 2,000 years ago. And traditionally, we explain the text as saying, eye for an eye, monetary. It's monetary damage, meaning if someone poked or harmed his friend's eye or his enemy's eye, another person, he comes to court. The court has to assess what are the damages that were suffered because of that, lost days of work, medical insurance, coverage for the health expenses, emotional damage, etc., etc. And then they will make that person, the offender, pay the other person. There is, if we really go to an extreme, there could be some logic in taking it literally as a physical threat, because that would be the best deterrent for people not to get into fights with others. If people think that they could harm another person and get away with paying for it, sometimes they don't care. They will pay, and it wasn't like today's lawsuits of millions of dollars. It would be a high sum, but not something that would stop a person from harming another person. But if they think of, if I do that, I'm going to lose an eye or a hand, then maybe they will be more reluctant. There are similar laws, by the way, regarding slaves, but because slavery was widely accepted at the time, the Torah is trying to eliminate it. So the laws are a little different. What it says regarding slaves, that if the master knocked out his slave's tooth or hurt his eye, he has to set him free. And this again, we just see the idea of a deterrent. Instead of the Torah telling the master, you're not allowed to physically hurt your slave, at the time where they did have that, the Torah says, if you harm him physically, you will make him a free person. That's a very strong incentive not to harm one's servant, slave. Now we look at the Midrash Halacha, and they say this: Ayn tahat ayn. Tana Davi Hizkiya, Ayn tahat ayn, velo ayn venefesh tahat ayn. This is a later rabbi, meaning later than the time of the Mishnah, who says this: how do I know that an eye for an eye means monetary damage and not physical punishment? Because it says an eye for an eye. But if you poke someone's eye with the medical conditions that they had back then, it could lead to death. Infection, meaning probably they saw cases where people were injured and an eye injury led to death. So they say you can never guarantee that your physical punishment would be limited to the eye. It could lead to other complications and death. And the Torah says an eye for an eye. Or in other words, what it says also that an eye for an eye is never really an eye for an eye, because what if someone with a bad eyesight harms someone with good eyesight, or vice versa? Then the punishment is not parallel to the damage. Or what if someone who uses his eyes for his work and needs very accurate eyesight? Let's say he works with diamonds, as compared to someone who's a musician, could play with his eyes closed, right? So do we say that it's the same kind of damage? So this is the argument of the rabbi for monetary damage. But this is how Midrash Halacha works. Then there's another there's another statement here. Ayin tahat ayin mamon. An eye for an eye, monetary damage. Ve'ema ayin mamash. Now, the Midrash raises the possibility, what if it means physical punishment? Amara elif mitachat asher aina. Ma le'alan mamon, afkan mamon. He says, in another place, in Sefer Devarim, we read, Tachat asher aina, because, like the word tachat in Hebrew is in lieu of, instead of. So, and it means, because mitachat means under. So when you pull something out, the other thing falls into its place. So it's a replacement. So in lieu of the damage that he caused to another person, he will have to pay. And over there, it's clearly payment. So this is another method of the Midrash. So the first method is of logical analysis is to look at the word. The Torah says an eye, so it's only an eye, not more than that. And I might cause more damage. The other method is, let's compare it to somewhere else. That's called Ilmod Satum Mina Meforash. Meaning, if one law is not fully detailed, but I have a similar law that is fully detailed, I'll take the details of one and I will apply it to the other. This way, the less detailed law is understood by the details of the other law. Then there's the third opinion. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ayin tahat ayin mamash. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that it means literally, you poke the other person's eye. However, the future generations weren't able to accept it. Even though he says clearly, mamash, literally, the Gemara says, mamash salka da'atach, it's impossible to say that it's literally, and then they reinterpret it to say, lomar, she'en shamin oto benizak ela b'mazik, that the assessment is not done according to the person who was damaged, but rather according to the person who caused the damage. But that's just a sample. We're not going to go into the details of the law, just to show that you have three words in the Torah, ayin tahat ayin, an eye for an eye. The literal meaning is one, but the final halakha is different. And there are one of two options. Either that the literal meaning was right, but the rabbis wanted to legislate differently because they felt it's too violent, and then they had to justify it with legal arguments, which is not a new thing. This is how the legal system works. You have amendments to the Constitution. The amendments to the Constitution do not argue that the original Constitution was wrong, but rather they say we reinterpret, it's a question of understanding the language of the Constitution. That's how the legal system works. So that's one way to see it. The other way to see it is, no, there was a tradition, oral tradition that goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that said ayin tahat ayin, an eye for an eye, means monetary damage and not physical damage. But according to that, we will have to say that the one opinion that deviates from that of Rabbi Eliezer, either he didn't hear the tradition or it was misunderstood. That's Midrash Halacha. Now, from that point in our literature, we get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is much more famous than Midrash Halacha. A lot of people hear about the Mishnah more than they hear about Midrash Halacha. But we don't think of, usually, if you don't go to yeshiva, if you don't study in a rabbinical school, you don't think of yourself as someone who reads Mishnayot on a regular basis. But we have some of the Mishnah literature is included in the Tefillah. For example, on Friday night, we read the second chapter of Tractate Shabbat, which is Bameh Madlikin, the list of candles and oils that are appropriate to use on Shabbat. Also in the Haggadah, Shel Pesach, we have a lot of material that is originally from the Mishnah. And we read Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot. So we do use, even people who are not, who don't study Torah on a regular basis, use the text of the Mishnah. And another important thing to know about the Mishnah, that of all the layers of Hebrew, the closest one to the Hebrew that we use today is the Hebrew of the Mishnah. Before the revival of the Hebrew language, there were different layers or different periods of Hebrew. We have biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew has its own place. Like I mentioned, we don't we don't speak biblical Hebrew today. We understand it, right? But we don't use it on a regular basis. When you turn on the news from Jerusalem, right? השעה 8 והרי החדשות מירושלים, ויהי בימי בנימין נתניהו ויאמר Donald Trump. They don't say that, right? It's not the Hebrew of the Torah that you use in the news. Then you had the Hebrew of the Mishnah and the Hebrew of the Midrash and medieval Hebrew. The one which is most fluent and easy to use is the Hebrew of the Mishnah. And of course it went through changes, but this is the language that we use. And it was put in place, written in between the 210 to 225 by Rabbi Ovadia. Rabbi Ovadia had the position, and he had the power and the knowledge and the respect that allowed him to take all the material that was already written in the form of Midrash Halakha. And remember, we mentioned what was the problem with Midrash Halakha. It was organized by the books of the Torah. And since you have some laws that are scattered all over the Torah, like the laws of Pesach, are mentioned in at least 6-7 different places over the books of Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. When you try to review your material, you have to try to pull stuff from many different locations in your memory. Everything was by heart. So Rabbi Ovadia says, let me take all the material that we have and create files that are organized by themes. That's what he did. You need a lot of power to do that. And he had this power because he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was also the prince from the Bet David dynasty. And he was also a very close friend of the emperor, Anthony, who is called in our sources Antoninus Caesar. It's Antonius. And Anthony was friendly with the Jews because he grew up, believe it or not, in North Africa. The Roman emperor was born in North Africa, probably somewhere either Mauritania or Libya of today, and he grew up with local Jews. There were Jews there, so they were friendly. So when he became emperor, he was very supportive of the Jews, and Rabbi Ovadia had this relative prosperity and tranquility under the Roman rule that allowed him to do that. So he gathered all the knowledge and organized it by chapters, by tractate and chapter. I'll explain how it works. But he had one major concern, which is recorded later on in later sources, and that is Devarim. He says this: Devarim shebe'al peh, ata rashay lomram bichtav. It is you're not allowed to write down oral matters, the things that are passed on orally. Now, what is the meaning of that? The traditional interpretation is this: God gave Moshe 2 sets of laws, the written law and the oral law. And it's sort of like a divine commandment that the written must remain written and the oral must remain oral. Why? No explanation. That's a traditional view. The more logical and academic view on that would be this. Rabbi Ovadia knew this, that as long as you have a living tradition with laws and practices and customs, they could always adjust themselves to changing reality. Right? For example, today you read when you go to yeshiva, if you study Gemara, you read a discussion of shor shenagach et hapara, a cow that was gored by an ox. And now you don't know who's responsible, whether it was deliberate or not. Okay, now most people here, I believe, do not own oxen, right, or bulls or cows. It's not what we do. Okay, so you say no, but you could learn from that and apply it to your possession, your property, because I mean it's true. But then there's another discussion there. An ox gored a pregnant cow, and then you find the fetus next to the cow, and you don't know whether it gave birth, delivered before or after. Now you have methods that allow you to do that. So, are you going to get stuck at the original halacha or adjust it to changing circumstances. Or, for example, the Mishnah speaks, and we'll see that, about the appropriate time to read the Shema. So the Mishnah says it's sunset, or a little before sunset, or when it gets dark, or when people start eating. They are all relative times, or they are subjective. They're not objective. Why doesn't the Mishnah use an objective language? Because at the time, people didn't have accurate means to measure time. They follow their instinct, their senses, and what they saw outside. That's it. Now, but if you stick to a language that was written 2,000 years ago, when you didn't have means to measure time, and then 2,000 years later, when you come and say, "Oh, I can't change it. This is the law." If it would not have been written, every generation would be able to say, "Okay, now we adjust this a little bit. We make it work with a new reality." That was the fear of Rabbi Ovadia. He says, there's an advantage to maintaining a legal system as an oral system, because you could always work with the current circumstances. And that would be in line of what the Torah says, when you have a question, you come to the judge of your time, your contemporary judge. The question is raised. Of course, I'm going to go to the judge who lives in my time. I can't go to a dead judge or to a future one. Obviously, I will go to the current judge. The Torah answered, the rabbis answered this question. They said, you have to go to the contemporary judge because he understands best your situation. I just spoke with someone who called me from Israel yesterday with the question. He's a sort of Dayan, very knowledgeable, and he was trying to help someone who, a Hasidic family, that one of the siblings married a non-Jew, and they completely ousted that guy. They don't want to talk to him. They don't want to. He's the one that sort of created the bridge. He found out that the woman did convert, but the family rejected the conversion and accepted. It's a complicated story. In any case, he quoted to me Rabbi Elyashiv, one of the leaders of the Haredi Judaism, who said that for someone who married a non-Jew, when he passes away, you don't sit shiva, you don't do any avelut for him. It's not part of the family. And that man, who was himself part of the Haredi Judaism, said, I think that Rabbi Elyashiv did not understand the reality outside Israel. Now, if he would have said it out loud in Israel, they would stone him. You can't say that. How can you say that the rabbi doesn't know or doesn't comprehend or understand the reality? But as a person who he's a Hasidic Jew from Borough Park who now lives in Israel, he knows both realities, and he says, I think that's a mistake. That when you create this division, you're cutting that person and that family off from the Jewish people, and we cannot do that. But the point is really, do we understand what are the circumstances? I'll give you another example. Many rabbis in Israel, even Zionist rabbis, even people who are very, very supportive of the state of Israel, ruled that you say Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, but you say it at the end of the prayer. One of them is Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. So great Talmid Chacham. He was very close to my family. His father, a student of my great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliyahu, but was also a Kabbalist. He was very strongly connected to Kabbalah. He says, you say Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, but you say it at the end of the prayer. Now, what happens is that for him, Kabbalah is the most important thing. You don't. We didn't even get to the Mishnah. You don't move parts within the tefillah. So if it was not established at the time of the rabbis, you cannot change the tefillah. It's better to say it at the end. What is missing here? What's missing is understanding of the communities outside Israel, because what happens in the diaspora is that you have people who are opposed to the state of Israel and anti-Zionist, and they say, you see, even your rabbis don't say the Hallel in its proper place. Now, when you're in Israel, the very fact that you live in Israel already puts you in that mood of, if you're in that field of supporting Israel, being part of the Zionist endeavor, and being joyous with the Hallel. Doesn't matter if you say it in the beginning or at the end of Tefillah. But in America, I've seen in many different communities, there's a huge difference. If you said the Hallel at the end of the Tefillah, it's like the dangling participle. Oh, we already finished, we're just adding something nice. If you say it in the place where we say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh and holidays, then we say, oh wow, then Yom HaAtzmaut is a holiday. It's important, it's sacred. So that's just an example of why it is important to have a contemporary judge, a contemporary rabbi who understands the community, understands the people. So that was the concern of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi before writing the Mishnah. He was afraid that what he's going to do now, instead of seeing a live stream, then you see live broadcast, where you can have problems, you can have mistakes, but it will be corrected. You're going to have not even a video, you're going to have still frames, like frozen in time. That's the law. But hey, now reality has changed, and we can't change it. This is always the argument that you hear. And so he was afraid of it, but eventually decided, I'll have to write it down no matter what, because if I don't do that, two things will happen. One, because of persecutions and that were before his times, and he knew that it's going to come again. People are going to forget. We're not going to have the infrastructure of learning and teaching. And he was afraid also that he saw that so many different schools, each one holds in a different opinion, that the Torah will split again and again and again, and the nation will fall apart. So that was his main focus of writing the Mishnah and putting it together. And he did it. He divided into Shisha Sedarim, 6 orders. Each one of them deals with a different topic. We use the term Zman Nakat as an acronym. The first one deals with the laws of Brachot and all the agricultural laws. The second one deals with the holidays and Shabbat. Third one with all the laws that have to do with the family, marriage, divorce, etc. The fourth order, Nezikim, deals with the laws of damages and financial laws. And the fifth deals with the laws of the sacrifice and the temple, and the sixth with laws of purities and impurities. So we covered everything. Today, people mainly learn only 4 of them, and we'll go more in detail, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next session.